I Am Malala, Chapter 6, Children of the Rubbish Mountain. As the Kushal school started to attract more pupils, we moved again and finally had a television. My favorite program was Shaka Laka Boom Boom, an Indian children's series about a boy called Sanju who has a magical pencil. Everything he drew became real. If he drew a vegetable or a policeman, the vegetable or policeman would magically appear. If he accidentally drew a snake, he could erase it and the snake would disappear. He used his pencil to help people. He even saved his parents from gangsters, and I wanted that magic pencil more than anything else in the world. At night, I would pray, God, give me Sanju's pencils. I won't tell anyone. Just leave it in my cupboard. I will use it to make everyone happy. As soon as I finished praying, I would check the drawer. The pencil was never there, but I knew who I would help first. Just along the street from our new house was an abandoned strip of land that people used a rubbish dump. There's no rubbish collected in Swat. Quickly, it became a rubbish mountain. I didn't like walking near it as it smelled so bad. Sometimes we would spot rats running through it and crows would circle overhead. One day, my brothers were not home, and my mother had asked me to throw away some potato peels and eggshells. I wrinkled my nose as I approached, swatting away flies and making sure I didn't step on anything in my shoes. As I threw the rubbish on the mountain of rotting food, I saw something move and I jumped. It was a girl about my age. Her hair was matted and her skin was covered in sores. She looked like I imagined Shashaksha, the dirty women they told us about in tales in the village to make us wash. The girl had a big sack and was sorting rubbish into piles, one for cans, one for bottle tops, another for glass, and another for paper. Nearby, there were boys fishing in the pile of metal using magnets on strings. I wanted to talk to the children, but I was too scared. That afternoon, when my father came home from school, I told him about the scavenger children and begged him to go with me to look. He tried to talk to them, but they ran away. He explained that the children would sell that they had stored to a garbage shop for a few rupees. The shop would sell it on a profit. On the way back home, I noticed that he was in tears. Abba, you must give them free places at your school. I begged. He laughed. My mother and I had already persuaded him to give free places to a number of girls. Though my mother was not educated, she was the practical one in the family, the doer, while my father was a talker. She was always out helping people. My father would get angry sometimes. He would arrive home at lunchtime and call her, Tur Pekai, I am home, only to find she was out and there was no lunch for him. Then he would find she was at the hospital visiting someone who was ill or had gone to help a family so he could not stay cross. Sometimes, though, she would be out because she was shopping for clothes in China Bazaar and would be and that would be a different matter. Whenever we lived by my mother filled our house with people. I shared my room with my cousins, Anisa from village, who had come to live with us so she could go to school, and the girl called Shahnaz, whose mother Sultana had once worked in our house. Shahnaz and her sister had also been sent out to collect garbage after their father had died, leaving them very poor. One of her brothers was mentally ill and was always doing strange things like setting fire to their clothes or selling the electric fan we have we gave them to keep cool. Sultana was very short tempered and my mother did not like having her in the house. But my father arranged a small allowance for her and a place for Shanaz and her other brother at his school. Shanaz had never been to school, so even though she was 2 years older than me, she was put in two classes below and she came to live with us so that I could help her. There was also Nuria, whose mother Karo did some of our washing and cleaning, and Alishpa, one of the daughters of Khalida, the woman who helped my mother with the cooking. Khalida had been sold into marriage to an old man who used to beat her, and eventually she ran away with her three daughters. Her own family could not take her back because it is believed that a woman who has left her husband and has brought shame to her family For a while, her daughters also had to collect rubbish to survive. Her story was like something out of the novels I had started reading. The school has expanded a lot by then and had three buildings. The original one in Lendeka was a primary school, and then there was a high school for girls in Yahya Street and one for boys with a big garden of roses near the remains of Buddhist temple. We had about 800 students in total, and although the school was not really making money, my father gave away more than 100 free places. One of them was to a boy whose father, Sharafat Ali, had helped my father when he was penniless college student. They were friends from the village. Sharafat Ali worked at the electricity company and he would give my father a few hundred rupees whenever he could spare them. My father was happy to be able to repay his kindness. Another was a girl in my class called Kausar, whose father embroidered clothes and shawls, a trade our region is famous for. When we went on school trips to visit the mountains, I knew she couldn't afford them, so I would pay for her with my pocket money. Giving places to poor children didn't just mean my father lost their fees. Some of their richer parents took their children out of the school when they realized they were sharing classrooms with the sons and daughters of people who cleaned their houses or stretched their clothes. They thought it was shameful for their children to mix with those from poor families. My mother said it was hard for the poor children to learn when they were not getting enough food at home, so some of the girls would come to our house for breakfast. My father joked that our home had become a boarding house. Having so many people around made it hard to study. I had been delighted to have my own room, and my father had even bought me a dressing table to work on. But now I had two other girls in the room. I want space, I would cry. But then I felt guilty as I knew we were lucky. I thought back to the children working on the rubbish heap. I kept seeing the dirty face of the girls from the dump and continued to pester my father to give them places at our school. He tried to explain that those children were breadwinners, so if they went to school even for free, the whole family would go hungry. However, he got a wealthy philanthropist, as they come, to pay for him to produce a leaflet asking, Kia hasule alam in bachan ka hak nahi. Is education not the right for these children? My father printed thousands of these leaflets, left them at local meetings, and distributed them around town. By then, my father was becoming a well known figure in Swat. Even though he was not a Khan or a rich man, people listened to him. They knew he would have something interesting to say at workshops and seminars and wasn't afraid to criticize the authorities, even the army, which was now running our country. He was becoming known to the army too, and friends told him that the local commander had called him lethal in public. My father didn't know what exactly the brigadier meant, but in our country, where the army is so powerful, it did not bode well. One of his pet hates was the ghost schools. Influential people in remote areas persuaded the government to build schools which never saw a single pupil. Instead, they used the buildings for their hujras or even to keep their animals. There was even a case of man drawing a teacher's pension when he had never taught a day in his life. Aside from corruption and bad government, my father's main concern in those days was the environment. Mingora was expanding quickly. Around 175,000 people now called it home, and our once fresh air was becoming very populated from all the vehicles and cooking fires. The beautiful trees on our hills and mountains were being chopped down for timber. My father said only around half the town's population had access to safe drinking water, and most like us had no sanitation. So he and his friends set up something called Global Peace Council, which, despite its name, had very local concerns. The name was ironic, and my father often laughed about it, but the organization aim was serious to preserve the environment of Swat and promote peace and education among local people. My father also loved to write poetry, sometimes about love, but often on controversial themes such as honor killings and women's rights. Once he visited Afghanistan for a poetry festival at Kabul Intercontinental Hotel, where he had read a poem about peace. It was mentioned as the most inspiring in the closing speech, and some in the audience asked him to repeat whole stanzas and couplets explaining wow wow when a particular line pleased them, which is a bit like, Bravo! Even my grandfather was proud. Son, may you be the star in the sky of knowledge, he used to say. We too were proud, but his high profile meant we didn't see him very much. It was always our mother who shopped for our clothes and took us to hospital if we were ill. Even though in our culture, particularly for those of us from villages, a woman is not supposed to do these things alone. So one of my father's nephews would have to go along. When my father was at home, he and his friends sat on the roof at dusk and talked politics endlessly. There was really one subject, 9/11. It might have changed the whole world, but we were living right in the epicenter of everything. Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al Qaeda, had been living in Kandahar, and when the attack of World Trade Center happened and the Americans had sent thousands of troops to Afghanistan to catch him and overthrow the Taliban regime which had protected him. In Pakistan, we were still under dictatorship, but America needed our help, just as it had in 1980s to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. Just the Russian invasion of Afghanistan had changed everything for General Zia, so 9/11 transformed General Musharraf from international outcast. Suddenly, he was being invited to the White House by George W. Bush and to 10 Downing Street by Tony Blair. There was a major problem, however. Our own intelligence service, ISI, had virtually created the Taliban. Many ISI officers were close to its leaders, having known them for years and shared some of their beliefs. The ICI's Colonel Imam boasted he had trained 90,000 Taliban fighters and even became Pakistan Consul General in Herat during the Taliban regime. We were no fans of the Taliban as we heard they destroyed girls' schools and blew up giant Buddha statues. We had many Buddhas of our own that we were proud of. But many Pashtuns didn't like the bombing of Afghanistan or the way Pakistan was helping the Americans, even if it was only by allowing them to cross our airspace and stopping weapons supplies to the Taliban. We didn't know then that Musharraf was also letting to Americans use our airfields. Some of our religious people saw Osama bin Laden as a hero. In the bazaar, you could buy posters of him on a white horse and boxes of sweets with its picture on them. These critics said 9/11 was revenge on the Americans for what they had been doing to other people around the world, but they ignored the fact that the people in the World Trade Center were innocent and had nothing to do with American policy, and that the Holy Quran clearly says it is wrong to kill. Our people see conspiracies behind everything, and many argued that the attack was actually carried out by Jews as an excuse for America to launch a war on Muslim world. Some of our newspapers printed stories that no Jews went to work at the World Trade Center that day. My father said that this was rubbish. Musharraf told our people that he had no choice but to cooperate with Americans. He said that they had told him either you are with us or you are with the terrorists, and threatened to bomb us to back to the Stone Age. If we stood against them, but we weren't exactly cooperating as the ISI was still arming Taliban fighters and giving their leaders sanctuary in Quetta. They even persuaded the Americans to let them fly hundreds of Pakistani fighters out of northern Afghanistan. The ISI chief asked the Americans to hold off their attack on Afghanistan until he had gone to Kandahar to ask Taliban leader Mullah Omar to hand over bin Laden. Instead, he offered the Taliban help. In our province, Maulana Sufi Muhammad, who had fought in Afghanistan against the Russians, issued a fatwa against US. He held a big meeting in Malaknand where our ancestors had found the British. The Pakistani government didn't stop. The governor of our province issued a statement that anyone who wanted to fight in Afghanistan against NATO forces was free to do so. Some 12,000 young men from Swat went to help that Taliban. Many never came back. They were mostly killed, but as there is no proof of death, their wives can be declared widows. It's very hard on them. My father's close friend Wahid Zaman's brother and brother-in-law were among the many who went to Afghanistan. Their wives and children are still waiting for them. I remember visiting them and feeling their longing. Even so, it all seemed far, far away from our peaceful Garden Valley. Afghanistan is less than 100 miles away, but to get there, you have to go through Bazaar, one of the tribal areas between Pakistan and border with Afghanistan. Bin Laden and his men fled to the White Mountains of Tora Bora in eastern Afghanistan, where he had built a network of tunnels while fighting the Russians. They escaped through these and over the mountains into Kurram, another tribal agency. What we didn't know that was that Bin Laden came to Swatan, stayed in a remote village for a year, taking advantage of Pashtun Valley hospitality code. Anyone could see the Musharraf was double dealing, taking American money while still helping the Jihadis, strategic assets, as the ISI calls him. The Americans say they gave Pakistani billion of dollars to help their campaign against Al Qaeda. But we didn't see a single cent. Musharraf built a mansion by Rawal Lake in Islamabad and bought an apartment in London. Every so often, an important American official would complain that we weren't doing enough and they suddenly become big fish would be caught. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, was found in a house just a mile from the Army's chief official residence in Rawalpindi. But President Bush kept praising Musharraf, inviting him to Washington and calling him his buddy. My father and his friends were disgusted. They said the Americans always prefer dealing with dictators in Pakistan. From an early age, I was interested in politics and sat on my father's knee listening to everything he and his friends discussed. But I was more concerned with matters close to home, our own street to be exact. I told my friends at school about the rubbish dump children and that we should help. Not everyone wanted to, as they said the children were dirty and probably deceased, and their parents wouldn't like them going to school with children like that. They also said it wasn't up to us to sort out the problems. I didn't agree. We can sit by hope and government will help, but they won't. If I can help support one or two children and another family supports one or two, then between us we can help them all. I knew it was pointless appealing to Musharraf. In my experience, if my father couldn't help with matters like those, there was only one option. I wrote a letter to the God. Dear God, I wrote, I know you see everything, but there are so many things that maybe sometimes things get missed, particularly with the bombing in Afghanistan. But I don't think you would be happy if you saw these children on the on my road living on a rubbish dump. God give me strength and courage and make me perfect because I want to make this world perfect. Malala. The problem was I did not know how to get it to him. Somehow I thought it needed to go deep into the earth, so first I buried it in the garden. Then I thought it would get spoiled, so I put it in a plastic bag. And then didn't see much use. We will like to put sacred text in flowing water, so I rolled it up, tried it on a piece of wood, placed a dandelion on top, and floated it in the stream which flows into Swat River. Surely God would find it there.